In this video, I'm going to teach you 5 easy things you can do right now to rank up in Valorant. But before we get into that, there's one thing I need to mention as a disclaimer. You as a player only have yourself to blame or to celebrate for how far you've gotten in Valorant so far. And you as a player are the only thing that's going to make you get further beyond where you're at right now. And the number one issue that I see in the students that I coach is that they don't play enough. They simply don't have enough hours in the game. So no matter what I tell them in a coaching session or what they learn in a YouTube video, it could be the best knowledge in the world and you could be getting coached by the best coaches in the world. It does not matter if you're not putting the time in. Whether you're not putting the time in because you're lazy or you're just busy outside of the game, either way, the result is the same. You need to understand that you can only get as far as you're willing to push yourself. And it's kind of sounding dramatic, but it's true. And I just want to get that out of the way before we get into these 5 tips. Because these 5 tips are really things that you can do right now to rank up. But even before these, you can't rank up if you're just not playing the amount that you need to play. All right, so without further ado, here are the 5 things you can do today to rank up immediately. The first thing on the list is to master an agent. The only exception to this tip is if you're absolutely just brand new to the game and you don't even know what all the agents do yet. In that case, what you should do is play them all until you're comfortable enough and understand what they all do on a fundamental level. But for the rest of you who already know what all the agents do, this one applies to you. So this is going to have multiple advantages to it, with the main one being that the other team is just going to be at a huge deficit with you in terms of agent knowledge and being able to just play and execute on your agent at a high level. When I think of people who are like one-tricking agents and mastering them to a point where it's super annoying, I think of like a lot of Sky mains, because there's just so many annoying little flash tricks you can do. Somebody who's really knowledgeable with the dog can get so much info with it and make so many cool plays with it. I think that people who main Sky are a great example of what can be done if you like really master an agent. Or imagine like a Cypher main who's just got super complex setups and understands how to actually play off of them. Or imagine a Cypher main who's just really good at using deep trips and getting super advanced information and capturing like an entire side of the map for their team. I think that's just so oppressive and annoying to deal with, but as a low rank player, you can't really just be expected to like know or do these things without putting in a bunch of time on these types of agents, because you just don't have the game knowledge or the experience yet. And so this aspect of maining an agent is really going to get you ahead just in terms of like actual getting kills with your agent and being effective on the agent. I think that the less stated but still like super important aspect of maining an agent is the amount of like brain space that it'll free up for you. Because think about it like this, right? If you don't actually have to think that hard about what Cypher setup you're going to do or how you want to use your Sky flashes, etc., you have a lot more extra brain capacity to think about and learn more complex aspects of the game, like things like rotations, ult economy, thinking about the tendencies of the other team, etc. And so I think this is something that's super understated when people talk about mastering an agent, but it's such a big part of it. And being able to free up that mental space so that you can learn the more nuanced or complex parts of the game is really what's going to help push you into higher and higher ranks. All right, so tip number 2 is about creating a consistent environment for yourself. And playing the same agent every game, or at least trying to play the same agent every game, plays into this. But it also goes way beyond into things like the physical aspect of how you're setting yourself up and how you warm up and things like that. So when we think about Valorant, we like to think a lot about the agents that we're playing, the setups we use, how we use the abilities, ult economy, all of these kinds of things, right? But I think what people lose sight of is that fundamentally Valorant is just Counter-Strike. And so the most important thing that you can do with your team is just be good for one frag every round, as long as you're not doing it in some like troll way where you're just playing one and done spots. And so the best way that you can be good for one frag every round is by understanding how muscle memory works and mastering this aspect of the game. Because if you think about it, right, this game is just all about micro adjustments and crosshair placement. And you don't get either of those things without muscle memory. So the question becomes, how do you facilitate the growth of muscle memory and how do you tap into it when it's actually time to perform? And so I want to actually break this down into 2 halves. I want you to think about it in terms of physical consistency of environment and in-game consistency of environment. And when I say environment, I mean in terms of like physical mechanics based environment that's going to be affecting like your aim and stuff. So to start off, let's talk about the physical environment. We're talking about things like how high is your chair off the ground. You don't want to be like moving it up and down a bunch because that's going to affect the angle that your hand lays on your desk to hold your mouse. We're talking about how you hold the mouse. We're talking about things like how far away is the monitor from your screen, because all of these things are going to impact the way that your hand moves across the mouse pad. Like think about like trying to make a flick, right? It feels a lot different kind of depending on how you're sitting and how you're holding the mouse, etc., etc. And so we want to control for all these variables as much as possible so that our mind and hand can become in sync when it comes to aiming in this game. And so this is something you can implement literally right now. Just pick a spot that you want all of these things to be at and don't change it. And I promise within like a week of playing or a week of aim training, you're going to see improvement because everything is going to become just more ingrained in you and you're not going to have to think about how you're aiming as much. And it just gets better with time. The one exception to this that I would say is if you already have done this for a long time, there is value in sort of mixing it up. So if you go for like 3 months of like not changing anything, there's value in sort of like switching little things, like maybe moving your sense a bit. There's this thing in like aim training where you go into your aim trainer and you double your sense. And then so you will go back into your main game and the sense is like much lower and much easier to control. So there's little things like that, but that's a little bit more advanced. So if you're like still trying to break into like Ascendant, Immortal area, then I wouldn't worry about that stuff too much. Just focus on keeping everything consistent. So now that we've talked about the physical aspects of what to keep the same for your muscle memory, the in-game stuff sort of follows right along, right? So the most obvious one is just don't change your sensitivity because this is going to impact your muscle memory. Try to use like the same guns all the time. It's good to experiment a little bit to see where you're comfortable. It depends on where you are in your journey as a player, but the most important thing is just sort of like pick, like, are you a Vandal or a Phantom player? Just pick. It's literally that easy. Just pick one and master it. Are you the type of person who likes to buy sheriffs on eco rounds? Or are you the type of person who likes to use like a shorty or even just prefer a classic and some utility on eco rounds? These are things that literally all you have to do is pick and stick with it, and you're going to see improvement rather quickly. All right, so we've gotten this far in the video, and I just want to quickly thank you guys for listening and watching and ask you to please subscribe and like the video. All right, so far we've talked a lot about keeping your environment consistent so that you can really limit as many physical or mechanical variables as possible. But there are certain things that muscle memory or just a consistent environment won't really help that much. And so this is where this third tip comes into play, and it's VOD review. I understand a lot of you guys probably can't record your own videos, and so this is where I would just recommend for you guys to either review somebody who's streaming their ranked on Twitch, or even review a pro game and just watch a certain player, preferably the one who's playing your agent, and sort of just analyze what they do in the situations they get into. And so quickly, I just want to get into some tips on how you can literally go about VOD reviewing yourself, because I know it's not a skill that most people have had the chance to develop yet, but I think it's super important if you want to improve quickly. So I think the number one thing you can do when you start to VOD review is just analyze your deaths first. There's a lot of information to take in, so I think just narrowing it down to just keep an eye on when you're dying and how you're dying and sort of analyze that situation in isolation. And I think that this will actually give you a lot of like quick information that you'll be able to use right away, because it'll tell you exactly what you're doing wrong. Like, are you peeking the wrong angles? Is your timing off? Are you sort of moving incorrectly? All these sorts of things. You'll be able to glean this when you go back and watch the VOD. Another big one is just watching your crosshair placement. I know a lot of new players struggle a lot with crosshair placement, and even advanced players, when it gets to the higher levels, struggle with crosshair placement. It can be a big filter for getting, between like the Immortal and Radiant area. It's just a super good way to just sort of check where your intuition thinks your crosshair should be versus where it actually should have been in the moment. But it's super hard to keep track of that when you're in the game, or even right after you die or something. So the VOD helps a ton with this. And again, the whole point of this video is the idea that we can implement stuff literally today, 5 minutes after you watch this video, you can implement these things and you will get better. And I promise, VOD review is the #1 thing that you can do to immediately fix your mistakes. 100%. End of story, the best thing you can do, and you're gonna see super fast results as long as you understand what you did wrong in the video and you know what you should do right next time. There's no stopping. All right, so moving on to tip number 4, and that's just finding a consistent duo. So you'll see a lot of these tips are really just about keeping the environment the same. So having a consistent duo, it does a bunch of things for you, right? Number 1, obviously, especially if you're lower rank, it will just give you one less point towards having like an absolutely unhinged teammate, assuming your duo isn't themselves completely insane and unhinged and willing to tilt. It helps in that front. It helps you keep your mental together. If you're somebody who likes to get tilted, I think it's less likely that you do that with a friend in the call, and it's just more fun to play with someone else. And at the end of the day, this is a game, and when you're having fun, you're also going to be playing your best, because that's when you get the most dopamine in your brain and you're most engaged in what you're doing. I think having a consistent duo is just super important, and again, you can do this literally today. You can go find a duo to play with, and every time you log in, just don't queue until you have a friend to play with, and it'll help your rank journey a lot. All right guys, so the 5th and final tip is just to have a good mental. I've seen so many amazing players get their careers absolutely destroyed at times, myself included, because of just a bad mental streak, right? I think that we're all human. Everybody can become emotional or tilted, but at the end of the day, if you're like that a majority of your games, then it's going to average down your rank a lot. So I think just doing everything you can to put yourself in a good mental space before the game, and especially during the game, then it will exponentially increase your ability to rank up. The last thing that I'll say about the mental aspect of ranking up is that when I was getting Radiant for the first time and sort of going through the ranks, I read this really amazing book called Perform Under Pressure by Dr. Cherry Evans. And so he's an ex-professional rugby player and now psychologist who does sports psychology. I know a lot of people don't like reading books, so we can just say that I read this so you don't have to. Essentially, the main lesson from this book here is that when we start to get emotionally charged about a situation, then we start to lose control. And so I think it's really easy to become emotional when we're either having a lot of fun or when we get really frustrated. And so I think that the lesson there is that we just have to maintain neutrality in an emotional sense as much as possible, because once you lose the neutrality of your emotions and you start to let them slip, you actually, according to this book and the studies in it, you lose control of your psychology, and that's when you really start getting tilted and frustrated about what's going on in the game, and you lose control of your own actions to some extent, right? I don't think anybody who's like freaking out and having a meltdown in ranked, would do that if they had full choice over what they were doing. I understand, like, they're a human being and they literally do have a choice about what they do, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And so the lesson that I want you guys to take away, which you can immediately implement into your gameplay and start ranking up from it, is just try to be neutral in emotional sense when you're playing, and it will help you avoid the big swings that come with, losing or winning a Valorant game. All right guys, so those are the 5 tips. So we talked about mastering an agent and how important that is. We talked about creating a consistent environment, both in terms of our physical environment and how we sit and how we hold our mouse, etc., and in game, where we're trying to be using the same rifles every round, we Vandal or Phantom player, what is our sensitivity, etc., etc. Talked about the importance of VOD reviewing so that we can review our mistakes, finding a consistent duo, and finally having a good mental. Thank you guys so much for getting all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed, please remember to like and subscribe and comment with your thoughts below. I really enjoy interacting with the comments and reading all of them. And I'll catch you guys next time.